Greg here with Elden Selections. Thank you for clicking on our video. If you would like to taste along with us, click the link in the description and that'll bring you to the wines we are enjoying today. Don't forget to sign up for our email list. We offer all of our subscribers exclusive deals on our wines. And don't forget to follow us on social media for extra content, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and enjoy the tasting. I'm in. So my name is Greg. I work here in the United States selling wine or helping people find the right wines for them. And so I'm the contact in the United States as well as Joanne. So Joanne is the customer service people that most people have probably talked to prior to me coming on board, but either of us can always help you with any questions. Stephen here is a WSET certified teacher, so he knows so much about wine and studied it for a while, was also a wonderful chef in a castle in Ireland, and now he works in the Domaine de Cromy and has been there for the past couple of years. We're helping Dennis and Ellie with everything, you know, as far as choosing wines to taking their guests on tours and everything like that. So yeah, that's just a little bit about us too. And then obviously Dennis is the owner and the proprietor of this company and kind of got everything started. He's been in Burgundy for the past 30 years or a little bit more even. So, I mean, you know, it's like his backyard. He knows so many of the people there. All the producers he knows are personal friends for the most part. Some are newer, but yeah, he's been around for a while.
Yeah, so hello everyone. It's a pleasure to do another one of these tastings. They're great fun for us. So yeah, as Greg so nicely introduced me, I'm Stephen. I live here in Domaine de Cromy. Myself and Lily, my wife, arrived here a few years ago, and we work along with Dennis and Ellie. Really, our main role here is to source Domaine bottled small production Burgundy and export them to the US under the name Elden Selections, and we sell them through burgundywine.com. So it's a great role to have here, to going around to find small producers, see that they're good enough for Elden Selections. And Domaine de Cromy is a beautiful manor house. Many of the clients that we have in the US that also fall in love with the wine have the aspiration to come to France, and we also host people in that role here in the Domaine. So people come for a week and have the experience of visiting winemakers, enjoying Ellie's great food and doing some fantastic wine tastings and just making memories. So we're going to try 3 of our producers. We have nearly 40 on the list now, and we're going to try 3 of them this evening. A Chablis, a Côte de Beaune, and a Côte de Nuits. So we're hitting the 3 big kind of regions of Burgundy. And so there's kind of 5 that we speak of in total, the 5 regions of Burgundy: Chablis, the Côte de Nuits and Côte de Beaune, which combined make the Côte d'Or, and then the Côte Chalonnais and the Côte Maconnais. Some people include Beaujolais. We were going to discuss that later with a view of a map. And then there's 4 classifications of the wine. So we have regional wine, village wine, Premier Cru, and Grand Cru. So really, on the surface of it, Burgundy is very simple. And even with the grape varieties, that simplicity continues. Mainly, I mean, there are exceptions, but mainly all Burgundy white is Chardonnay. Like I said, there are some exceptions that we may enjoy in future tastings, but think of it as just Chardonnay for Burgundy white. For example, all Chablis is Chardonnay, and Pinot Noir is the main red grape. So when people think of Burgundy being so complex, on the surface, Burgundy is quite simple. It's 2 main grape varieties, 5 main regions, and 4 classifications. So I think with all that, we could maybe start with tasting some of the wines. What do you think, Greg?
Let's get into it. I know that's what everyone is here for, so.
Yeah. Someone said recently that these wine tastings, they spend too long chatting at the beginning, not with our ones, but they spend too long chatting before we actually get into the wines. So this Chablis is actually from Domaine Oudin. So it's 2 sisters. You got that picture there?
Yeah, hold on a second. I'm having just.
It's no problem anyway. So it's two sisters, and they featured in our kind of, there was a great movement in wine the last 2 years, which kind of featured the prominence of women winemakers, just women generally within the wine industry. And so Natalie and Isabelle Oudin, they featured heavily in our kind of featuring of this aspect of wine. And they took over their parents' domain, and it was quite small. They've expanded it to about 20 acres now, but still small. And it's a small commune just south of the village, just south of Chablis. And the plots for this wine is about 15 different plots around the village of Chichet, and both left bank and right bank from the River Sereine.
So this is Natalie Oudin, and this is her sister Isabella, the two people that have taken over. And so just a little map of Chablis, of Burgundy. At the bottom, you'll start here in Beaujolais, move up to the Macon village, Côte Chalonnais, Côte de Beaune, Côte de Nuits, and then Chablis is all the way up here by itself. So it's actually closer to Champagne than it is to the Côte de Nuits.
Yeah, it's quite interesting because historically, well, a lot of people ask, why is Chablis part of Burgundy? And if you go back, are you able to just scroll back quickly to that map?
Yes.
So there was a bug in the ground in the vines called phylloxera. It's still actually in the ground now. And it killed all the European vines kind of mid-1800s onwards. So originally, before phylloxera, Chablis and Dijon was connected fully with vines. After phylloxera, they just didn't replant that section. So that's why it looks like there's a big gap there. Historically, there wouldn't have been a gap there, but they only replanted really the very best terroir after phylloxera. So that's just quite an interesting story as to why it's looks like that island away from Burgundy.
Yeah, that's quite a gap of vines that they didn't replant. I'm surprised.
Yeah. They were growing vines a lot of other places. So here we are, Chablis, and you can see Chichet, excuse my pronunciation, just south of the village, of the main village of Chablis. It's part of Chablis, it's a commune. And so you can see the river here running down through the middle, which is the Sereine River. And left bank, you have the Premier Cru Vaucapin, and you have the left bank is the Vourgray, and right bank is the Vaucapin. The right bank, it gets a bit more sun. The left bank has a little bit more shade, and generally kind of considered a bit more mineral, a little bit richer on the right. But there's exceptions because there's pockets of sun traps within all the terroir. So the nice thing about this, the domain is situated in Chichet, and the nice thing is the 15 separate plots that this wine comes from gives a really good general overall example of the terroir of that commune, which is kind of classic Chablis, Kimmeridgian, really small, stony, lots of kind of broken up oyster shells when you go into it. And
yeah, I think with, even the smell of it, you can kind of tell, you get a little bit more of those ripe fruits on it. Still like great minerality, great salinity, and everything.
Well, if everyone has a good sniff of the wine before we have a drink of it, and we'll just focus maybe on the smell first. So I think the first thing that comes into your nose is the mineral. It hits before the fruit. So I kind of get like a saline mineral. And even I would go as far as to say oyster juice, the juice of an oyster, not just not the actual oyster itself. But if you smell that smell, it has that kind of element to it. The fruit then comes next. And you get kind of sharp green fruits.
Yeah.
I was thinking like Granny Smith apple, but not the skin, just the flesh.
Yeah, a little bit more juicy.
Yeah, with maybe some fresh gooseberry. You really have to work hard to We always say at these Zoom tastings that we do, there's a difference between drinking wine and tasting wine and evaluating wine. And so, you know, we need to put more effort into our nose and our mouth and our brain when we do these tastings. So I would say the wine's not floral driven, but I do get a little bit of blossom on the nose. But again, it would come mineral, fruit, and then a little bit of the floral. And I was saying I got a tiny bit of white pepper.
Yeah, which is really interesting. Usually you get that fruit up front when you're smelling a wine. It's usually the first thing that kind of comes to mind. But
yeah, it depends on the terroir, and especially in Chablis, because you know that Cameroonian clay really shines through on the wine, and they allow it to go through a thing called malolactic fermentation. And when a wine does that, it means that the fruit profile can change slightly from a fruit forward wine into a more complex wine.
Okay.
And so they've allowed that to happen here. Historically, they didn't allow it to happen on hot years in Chablis, but more and more, every wine is being allowed to go through full malolactic now. Yeah. Because it just develops a more complex wine.
Right. All right. So let's get into the taste of it.
Yeah. And if anyone else gets any other notes on their nose, please put it in the comments, because that would be really interesting. Remember that there are absolutely no wrong notes that you can get, really, because if you get them honestly, your nose is just picking up a compound that maybe my nose isn't good enough to pick up. So that's true. Yeah. So hopefully, let's have a drink.
Mm.
It's drinking really well. It's 2017 vintage, so you know, 3 years old now, and it's a village Chablis. It's really, really coming into its village life, you know. So it works right from the start to the end. I mean, the finish for me is still there even now. But if you were to break down the flavoring, I would say, you know, you get the acidity is brilliantly fresh.
Yeah.
But there's still a rich flavor. The wine is not just great acidity, it's got great flavor in it as well. And remember, we've got the village wine here, and I think, Greg, maybe we might speak briefly, or you'll definitely speak in a further email about some Premier Crus from this winery and from this domain. And then you can really see, when you get the same vintage and you just kind of move up to higher terroir, how the concentration probably will get, you know, a bit more powerful. And that's a great journey to go on, even at one dinner time, when you start off with the Chablis and then move on to the Premier Crus. But coming back to this, the mineral, I think on the nose, I got it very pronounced that it was like that oyster juice, saline mineral. On the mouth, I think the minerality is softened out a lot.
It's very juicy. I get like orange juice, or almost like a lemonade kind of taste to it. We've had some people say apples and pears, and instead of oyster juice, they say briny, which is another good term for it.
Briny's a good one. Very good.
So maybe that's a little bit better than oyster juice.
Kudos points. That's good. That's good. I'll steal briny for the next time. But yeah, I think the minerality from the nose softens around for me, and the fruit definitely becomes more prominent.
Yeah. Gooseberry is also another term that somebody just used. That's a great one.
Yeah, I got gooseberries on the nose. Yeah, fresh gooseberries on the nose. So it's an interesting, when you look at the winemaking process, no oak, which is common for a village Chablis, and common generally in Chablis to have no detectable oak. Sometimes with some Premier Crus and Grand Crus, they add a little bit, but they really want to preserve this kind of, you know, unique mineral fruit profile that they have up there. So they don't want anything to ruin it. But they've done a full year's aging on the lees, which kind of, again, you don't really detect it in the wine, but the body of the wine, I think, and the richness, it comes through in that. So
it has a little bit more weight on your mouth.
Kind
of smelling it. Absolutely.
Yeah, the flavor profile and the kind of weight of the wine combines perfectly. And I suppose all good winemaking is balance, you know. And when it comes to Burgundy, all the producers on the Elden Selections, their main priority is to create a balanced wine that kind of shows the terroir. On another way, the wine shows the winemaker's personality, but the winemaker in some ways isn't in control of that, I don't think. You know, the winemaker's aim is to show the terroir, and then we evaluate the wine with the winemaker's personality as well. That comes through in the wine, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. That's why you can drink the same terroir, same vintage with two different winemakers, and you'll get two different expressions. Right. But the expression of the terroir won't change.
Yeah, it's really fun to, you know, like those vineyards are so close together, and like you said, they're the same terroir, but it's just so versatile. The flavors of, you know, just little things that you can do on the winemaking side that really heightens certain things.
And again, village wine. So as you moved up into a Premier Cru, it would be a little bit more concentrated. But I think 2017, there might have been a little bit of rain during the flowering, which affected the yield. So again, the yield is a lot lower than it should have been, which makes the wine a little bit more concentrated. Yeah. So that's a good reason to be buying that 2017. You know, it's not really, sometimes the wine drinker can get lucky where the wine maker maybe gets a little bit unlucky with nature. But we can benefit from the unexpected concentration.
What kind of foods would you say would be good with this?
Well, typically shellfish is great with Chablis and all kinds. You know, the Kimmeridgian clay is really fossil marine of broken up shellfish. So historically, I'll come back to my oyster juice. Oysters are a great pairing, crab and scallops, mussels. But, you know, also don't forget some of these great high acid cheeses. My favorite cheese that we have here in Burgundy is called Époisse, and I'm sure you can get it in the States if you Google it. It's absolutely beautiful, and that with this would be, you know, great. But food pairing is interesting, and you know, my background, as you said in the introduction, is a chef. So I came at wine from a total culinary kind of perspective, and I think that even though there are some unarguable classic combinations, that people's opinions about food and wine pairing are changing. Like, so definitely some of these powerful Burgundy whites go perfectly with what we would have considered traditionally dishes that go with red wine. So I think when it comes to wine pairing, everyone should just be a bit more open-minded, and you know, and you know, but fish and chips, I suppose, come to mind, because something like fish and chips with this, it's got great acidity that it would cut through the kind of fatness of that. Yeah. Also, the flavor of that would work really well. So I suppose right now, if you ask me what I'd have with it, fish and chips.
Fish and chips, yeah. That's I mean, I think sometimes when I drink these wines with the food that I make, it's almost like no matter what I make, it still goes really well with it.
Yeah.
Because of like the brightness of the acidity and everything, washes your palate clean. I know we told people to grab some, like a salty snack. So now would be a great time to kind of try that, see what the wine tastes like before and after, with that little bit of salt. Even just a little bit helps. And I did just, this is kind of funny because Burgundy is a very, you know, as prevalent of a wine and like prestigious of a wine region it is, they don't have great internet there. So I just got a message from Dennis saying that his internet is not working right now. So it can be a little bit tricky out in Burgundy, but
yeah, it's one of the big problems. I had to actually move from the pressoir room, which is in Cromley, which some of you, like Al Smith, I just seen the note from him there, they would remember this big pressoir we have in that room, in that dining room. And so I've moved into a new room that we've just done up, which is like a library room. So the internet is a little bit better here. So, so the internet in Burgundy is not as good as the wine, let's put it that way. But yeah, so that's Chablis. And so Shall we move on to the next one?
Yeah, I just want to. We have that one other picture that I thought was interesting.
Okay.
Um,
Oh yeah. So this is interesting. Yeah. So beautiful pictures, and so this shows kind of winter pruning happening in the, I think it is Domaine Oudin, isn't it?
yes.
And so they're doing their winter pruning there, and it looks very beautiful, but it's a very hard job actually, because as you can see, there's frost on the ground, and it just goes to show how northerly that Chablis is, you know, and we forget that it's kind of historically the most northern place that you could make still wine. So, and for me, when I look at these photos, it's two things. One, it shows that point of where Chablis actually is, even though you'll have frost further south too. But winter pruning from a winemaking perspective is probably, you could say it's one of the most important things, if not the most important thing that you can do. It sets the tone for your next vintage. Very, very, some would say crazy, some would say brave winemakers do extremely severe winter pruning, and they're taking a big gamble that they don't get spring frost, because that can kill your vintage altogether. But if they take that gamble and it pays off, you can then, all the energy of the vine is going into less fruit, which Chardonnay really needs, because Chardonnay, that's one of the reasons some people have this historically bad relationship with Chardonnay, is because of winemakers allowing the vine to overproduce. So
Right.
by winter pruning, you can really hold back on that, and what you produce then is quality fruit, but it takes a braver winemaker to do it. And so I think
Yeah.
with Oudin, we have.
It's always nice to have those extra few buds on the plant for just in case kind of situation.
Yeah. I mean, there is further pruning that happens during the season, but winter pruning is kind of, yeah.
And then there are the tin can looking things are basically where they burn the vines. I thought it was for like, you know, cleanliness of the vineyard so there's no funguses or anything, but it's just because they didn't know what else to do with the vines. So
I'm sure the smoke helps, but you know, for winter, I think it was maybe more to keep themselves relatively warm and not have to walk so far with the the cuttings. Yeah. But it's a beautiful picture.
All right, let's go on to Domaine Albert Boillot.
Okay, so we're moving on to our red. So we're coming a nice bit south here into the Côte de Beaune. So Albert Boillot is, well, Domaine Albert Boillot, the winemaker is actually called Raymond Boillot. And there's some very famous Boillot winemakers in the region. And
Henry Boillot is the most famous, correct?
Henri, yeah. And so I think Raymond is a cousin of Henri. But Raymond in himself is also, you know, a prestigious winemaker with kind of 40 harvests under his, I think it's 40 harvests under his belt at this stage. And I mean, we've been lucky enough to visit Raymond a few times, do a few cellar tastings. First of all, his house is absolutely chocolate box picture of winemaker house. It's gorgeous, and his cellar is beautiful as well. And one of the reasons I suppose that makes it so picture perfect is he's got absolutely tiny production. I think it's, you know, 10 acres in total. So when you're talking about our winemakers on Elden Selections list being, you know, small sustainable farmers, I don't think you can hit on any better example than Domaine Albert Boillot. And so he is situated in the village of Volnay, which is a beautiful village just kind of south of Beaune in the Côte de Beaune. And if you remember at the beginning, we said Côte de Beaune, Côte de Nuits, them two areas combined is the Côte d'Or. But they're very different when it comes to their wine profile of red wine and white wine. And so Volnay and the village just a mile up the road from Volnay towards Beaune is Pommard. So these two villages historically, Pommard and Volnay, have kind of gone hand in hand with different styles of winemaking, as I said, being just a mile apart. So Domaine Albert Boillot makes both Volnay and Pommard. And I think, again, Greg will go into more detail maybe tomorrow or through an email of some of the other recommendations that we'd have with this wine. But this is a really good example of, let me just grab the bottle. So we have a regional wine, and I hope that my camera shows this up, and you have the bottles in front of you, which says Bourgogne on the front of it like that. Doesn't say Volnay, doesn't say Pommard, doesn't say, you know, has the name Albert Boillot, but, you know, you have to know with 3,500 producers in Burgundy, you have to know specifically Albert Boillot and Raymond and the story. But the vineyard, the vines from this wine actually come from the commune of, we're rescued, from the commune of Pommard. So we have a regional wine with, Dennis, I'm on a roll right now, so that's good. I'll just continue to speak for a while. So we have a regional wine, but actually when you know the winemaker, you realize that the vines come from this famous village of Pommard. And so what you're really drinking is an expression of both the village and the winemaker, maybe in a, you know, a slightly reserved version than the Premier Cruise and things like that, but it's still that version. And so this is an area, these regional wines, that we get very excited about. And so, because they're amazing value and they're amazing quality, and also you have to allow us to introduce them to you, because if you just look at the label, you won't really be able to figure it out because of all these winemakers. So I think we should just get in and try the wine and then allow.
So right here again is the whole Côte d'Or. So that's the Côte de Beaune and the Côte de Nuits combined to make the Côte d'Or. So Pommard, you know, is towards the lower half of that, right below Beaune. So right here. So Albert Boillot is does mostly producing wines through these two communes.
Yeah, he lives in the village of Volnay. So you can see Volnay there. So he lives in this village and makes wine in Volnay and Pommard.
Yeah. And so this vineyard is right about here.
Yeah.
It's not on this app that I use that tracks all the vineyards. It just says only Village and Premier Cru vineyards, but about right there in the village. It's a regional
wine, but it's from a plot called, excuse my French, Dennis, Les Sorbins. And it's very interesting because when I was like looking more into this vineyard, apparently within Pommard, historically, there was a kind of there's a French phrase, and it's Point de Rougien sans Sorbin, which means kind of add a little bit of this vineyard, Sorbin, if you're making Rougien. And Rougien is the most prestigious vineyard within Pommard. So it kind of showed historically what the locals thought about this terroir where this wine came from. Pretty high. And so as politics and life went on, this became a regional wine, and Rougien is a Premier Cru, but a lot of people speak of it as Grand Cru. And so it's just an interesting story and brings it back that you know, this classification of terroir, along with the winemaker, there are some secret nuggets to be found within Burgundy, and that's what we get really excited about trying to find and show you guys. So we should probably start tasting, smelling first.
We do have a question about the clones in Pommard. So I know like clones are kind of tricky. There's not really all. I guess is there a certain clone that is?
There's lots. Yeah, there's lots of different. Dennis will be able to jump in much more qualified than me, but so if you take Pinot Noir for example, you know, a clone is like, if you say Pinot Noir is the family, clones are like members of that family. So there is actually a clone called Pommard, I think that is a lot of winemakers in America use that clone. They call it a clone called Pommard. So it's just different clones are the same variety, but they have slightly different traits or have reacted slightly differently to certain conditions. And so it's quite an interesting subject, because if you're planting a brand new vineyard, you want to take into consideration how the climate's changing and how that clone will react with the changing conditions. Because if you think that the vines for this wine are 60 years old already, okay, so when you plant a vineyard, you're not thinking about the next 5 years, 10 years, you're thinking about the next 100 years. So, you know, you have to take that into consideration. And clones and the people that are helping winemakers naturally decide on them, it's quite an important decision.
The thing is, hi guys, I'm sorry, I'm not Mr. High Tech, so it took me a little bit of time to figure out how to get in here. But this is a very interesting question. Yeah, you know, we just planted a vineyard here at the Domaine de Crome, and it was one of those. We did soil analysis from three different sources, and we had 3 different opinions on what clones we should plant. When they talk about clones, they're in the old days, what they did is they went and they took cuttings from the vines that they had, they stuck them in the soil. But because of phylloxera, they weren't able to do that anymore, because the phylloxera attacked the rootstock. So that anything that is planted in Burgundy right now is grafted onto phylloxera-resistant American rootstock. So it's an enormous industry. And it's like a flavor. It's almost like flavor of the day. I mean, there are studies going on all the time about what are the best clones. And it all depends on what you want. Do you want finesse in the fruit? Do you want something that stands up against frost? Do you want low yield or high yield? I mean, it all comes down to choice. It's sort of like a candy box. You can pick what you want. The more recent the plantation, the more you'll probably get into the more modern clones. Something like this, where with Raymond Boillot, I'm sure these vines have been there since he was a kid. I mean, so you know, whether they're old clones or Massel selection, I just don't know. I mean, this. But it really is it's almost like a flavor of the day. It's what the trend is, what the climate is doing. You know, people make choices based on what's happening now, and as Stephen says, it affects what you have in your vines for the next 50 years.
Yeah.
So,
I mean,
a roundabout way of saying not all of the clones in Pommard are Pommard clones, but yeah, just a little bit more information about clones. So,
yeah,
Pomard's just the name of a clone.
Right. Yeah.
Most of them have numbers.
Right.
But
yeah.
not even every clone in a vineyard can be the same. Some winemakers may plant a vineyard with different clones. So yeah, it's not. That's probably a Zoom all on its own.
Yeah, and that would be a subject all on its own. But you're absolutely right, Stephen. Most people who are planting vineyards right now want to put a variety of different clones in, so that you don't just have some sort of standard grape production across the whole thing. You want a little bit of contour.
Yeah, I was a horticulture major, so I mean that's the way that they told you to plant just any garden in general, or even communities and stuff. It should be varied, because otherwise you can come into a lot of different problems, especially like disease resistance and stuff like that.
So
start tasting smell of wines.
Yeah, but like I said, these vines are 60 years old, which is a nice age for a vine. I think it's an optimal age. It gives the winemaker a decent yield, a decent enough yield, and it gives us a decent concentration, I think.
Is there too old of an age for a vine? Like, is it there?
Well, eventually the vine will stop producing fruit. I mean, the older the vine gets, the yield drops. So, you know, from a commercial point of view, it can be a little bit not a great commercial decision to allow your vines to get crazy old. But the concentration of the fruit improves with age. a lot of winemakers now are pulling up maybe 5% of the vineyard every year and replanting. So therefore, the vineyard doesn't have this one massive blow and then this progression of age.
Yeah. The big domains will have a turnover. They'll, if you've got a 50 hectares, you'll do 5 hectares every year of every 10 years of rotation. But the problem becomes when you get down to these small producers who have like between 5 and 10 hectares, then it becomes a real choice between parent and child in terms of how you pass the vineyard on. Do you rip it up and plant new vines so that the kids have a head start on the vines, or do you keep those 60-year-old vines and make great wine till you're dead, and then your kids do, and then your kids can
keep the wine.
do what they have to do. I mean, no, that's what it is. It comes down to that. You can see the love transmitted by the decisions made in the vineyards.
So
when you think, Dennis, that Albert Boillot is 10 acres only, absolutely tiny. So that's a big discussion.
Well, I'm sure you told the story before I got here, but I mean, for him, I wouldn't call it a hobby because he was born into it. But he was the winemaker for one of the biggest negociant houses in Beaune for years and years and years. I mean, he was the man. So he was used to mass production, and so he'd go out with his cousin, and they'd tend their vines on the weekend, and they'd make their wine at the end of the year. And it was they were making their wine as opposed to the big negociant wine.
Yeah. We better get into this, or we're gonna absolutely run out of time.
So we had John said that it reminds him of unripe crab apples that he couldn't wait to eat as a kid. I remember those too. I like that description.
I like that.
A little bit. It kind of has like a liveliness of because of the acidity and everything. Yeah. It reminds me of that. Yeah.
I get cranberry on the nose.
Cranberry, yeah, a little bit of raspberry, like
raspberry, a fresh raspberry.
There's also one question too. It says, do grapes come from a wider range in regional wines than versus village wines? And I think the answer to that is they can. This wine you said though is all from one vineyard, so it does depend on the winemaker. Like we have a wine called Clos that everyone knows, and that comes from all one vineyard. So, but as a regional wine, it can come from anywhere in Burgundy. Is that correct?
That's perfect.
Most of the big negociant houses use Burgundy as their volume wine. So they'll take all their regional Bourgogne and dump it into one cuvee and have enough to be able to sell at the liquor store in the United States. But these small producers are making it just like they would make all their other ones. So they generally tend to come, in most cases, from the village where the winemaker is based.
Yeah. Yeah. And then all the village wines do have to come from that one village. But again, a lot of, at least our producers, everyone likes to kind of use that vineyard as like another way to promote it. Because some people love certain vineyards and everything. So, but yeah, village wines do have to come from that specific village. Or regional wines come from.
And again, they can be, if they're a single vineyard within a village, usually that vineyard's named on the bottle. If they're a blend of vineyards from around the village, that's just named then just as a village wine. So, I mean, I don't think there's any right or wrong with it. Sometimes, like we said with the Chablis, the Oudin Chablis, it was 15 separate plots from around the little village of Chichet. Is that correct, Dennis? Pronunciation, right? And so 15 separate plots really gives you an expression of the vineyard. Here we have one plot which gives you an expression of the village. Here's one plot with an expression of a vineyard and a winemaker. So there's benefits to both. So
mine is definitely, I think, more fruit forward kind of.
Yeah, I get like cherry kind of cherries, stone fruit, cherries, cranberry, raspberry. I get a little bit of toasted spice on the back, but it's very, very much on the back.
Very subtle.
Yeah.
I love
A
it. It's so
little,
fresh.
yeah, little bit of rustiness on the minerality. We
Someone
tried
said
a lot of,
red plum, like red plum.
For me, I know this because I know this one from year in, year out. This is to me is an example of what this 2018 vintage is.
yeah.
I mean, 2018 has lots of guts, lots of depth, lots of body, and that sort of stuff. But it's also got a charming edge to it. I mean, normally these Boillot Bourgognes are wines that you would expect to keep 3 or 4 years before they really start to show themselves. But this has charm, even with all that other, even with, I mean, because it's still got that chewiness, it's still got that, it's still got the
Yeah.
tannic structure. I mean, this is a wine that'll last a long time. It's just got that. It's just got that exuberant fruit, you know.
Yeah. On the palate, I think the drying tannins come through a lot more. You can tell them, but I know what you mean, Dennis. We bought this wine, myself and Lily bought this wine for ourselves personally to lay down for a couple of years, and I think we drank nearly all of the stuff that we bought to lay down, because every time
My
we
second batch of that.
yeah, we have to go back to buy some more to lay down.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, the dry on the palate, the tannin comes through a little bit more. It shows that the wine does have a lot of aging capability for a regional wine left in it. But the fruit on the palate compared to the nose drops off a little bit. But that shows the wine can develop. But it's still, like you said, very, very pleasant. I get a little bit more floral on the palate, a little bit of rose hip or something like that.
Yeah.
And he uses kind of an average of 2-3 year old barrels, no new oak, long on the lees.
That's also one thing. I know Dennis always talks about how there's so much excitement in the regional wines, and the more I go through them, the more I can't help but to agree, because you never necessarily know what you're going to get, but I always love the freshness of them. You know, there's never too much oak on it. It's usually older, so lets it breathe a little bit. But yeah, I mean, I agree. You never know what you're going to get, but it's always exciting.
That's the thing about small production.
Sorry, Dennis.
I was going to say that's the thing about these small production wines, and we say it all the time. But I mean, somebody who has a small holding, and has some Premier Cru and some Village Wine and some regional Appellation, is going to treat them all with the same respect. So you're ending up with a wine that is carefully crafted in a regional Appellation, as you will in a Premier Cru Appellation. But those wines, the regional Appellation wines, by nature, are going to be accessible much younger. They're going to be much more affordable. This is, I wouldn't say the sweet spot, but it's definitely the place where you go while you're waiting for the other wines to age, you know.
Yeah. One of the great things I think about the regional wines, probably for me the single best thing, is it's an introduction to the winemaker. That, you know, you're taking, every bottle of wine you buy is a little bit of a gamble, and you know, with Elden Selections, we make that gamble a lot less risky, because we've already kind of done the footwork. But you can still enter the world of a winemaker through the regional wine, and then the idea is to follow them throughout their range. You know, because if you like the regional, then you go to the Village, then you go to the Premier Cru or whatever, and you can just enjoy the range. It's like following an artist or a singer or a filmmaker or any of that. That's the way I think of it. And so the regional wine is a great way to just, you know, get a case of mixed regional wines and see who kind of like makes your boat rock, and then follow that winemaker for a while and see where it goes. That's what I think they're great for.
Yeah.
And then you start to realize that those Premier Cru wines are like for special occasions. I mean, and you do want to hang on to them until they come to that sort of maturity. The nice thing about these regional wines is you buy a case of them, you drink one every 6 months, and you can just see the development of the vintage and the producer and that kind of stuff. And that's almost like the canary in the mine for the Premier Cru and the bigger wines. It just gives you an indication of how everything's going.
So we have one question, and then I think we should probably move on to the next wine. It says, nice textural finish. Is that the young age? So. So is the textural finish, like the tannins and structure and everything, is that because it's young? Will it smooth out, I guess, is the question?
I think the texture. Sorry, go ahead, Dennis.
No.
Well, I was going to say, the textural finish, when I spoke to Raymond about this wine particularly, he spoke about, like all the red wines, he left it on the lees to create some of the body. A little bit of the wood will create some of the body. And I think that as the wine ages out, I don't think texturally it mightn't soften. Flavor-wise, it will become a little bit more rounded. But I think the texture is there because of the winemaking skills. But I'll let Dennis.
Yeah, no, texture is a result of nature and nurture kind of thing. I mean, you're gonna get it. If you don't have it when you're picking the grapes, you're not going to get it. I mean, but if you've got soft tannins and you've got ripe fruit and you've got a good balance of sugar and acidity, all of a sudden that is what texture is. I mean, texture is if a wine is really acidic, it doesn't have any texture because it's thin. If a wine is really sugary, it doesn't have any texture because it's fat. But if you get the cross of those two things, right, then you've got it's moelleux, the French say. It's got that sort of, that's texture in itself. And then on top of that, once the tannins are there, if they're not hard, if the tannins are soft, then that also sort of carries the acidity along. It's all part and parcel of good farming and judicious winemaking.
Right. Yeah.
Another good question, though.
Yeah. No, it's I mean, it is the question.
Yeah. So we're going to move on to the next wine, which is Domaine Jean Féry, and it's Côte de Nuit Village, Clos de Magny, 2018 again. So it has that 18 vintage that Dennis spoke about previously.
So this is Jean Féry, right? Correct?
Yeah.
Well, the gentleman.
And I think that's
No, I think that's his son.
This is his son?
Which is Frédéric, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
yeah, who's in charge of the winery now.
I got you. Okay.
Yeah.
This is their beautiful.
So they're in a village called Echevrons, which is at the kind of the behind the hills of the Côte de Nuit Village, behind the hills of Courglouin.
Yeah, if you go down the valley past and you go past Pernon-Vergelès and up into the hills, you're right there. So
yeah. So you can see here on the map, it's quite interesting where this vineyard is situated. So here in Le Doigt-Serigny, which is the lower appellation, this Le Doigt-Serigny is in the Côte de Beaune, and Courglouin is in the Côte de Nuit. So this line here is the border. Yeah, that line is the border. And Clos de Magny is at the very top of the hill. So it's got about a 300-meter elevation there on a road towards the commune of Magny. So it's a very interesting plot of terroir, very interesting terroir there. And they destem this wine 100%, 20% new oak. So you can see 20-day cold maceration, which is a long time.
Cold maceration helps give it color and kind of extracts a little bit more flavor from the grape skins.
Flavor, yeah, and I think color historically, but yeah, Dennis always says or teaches me that color isn't the thing that we. As they're making more refined Pinot, the color doesn't always relate to the flavor, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not. I mean, if you're asking how deep the color is in a Burgundy, you're asking the wrong question. I mean, sometimes you get it and sometimes you don't. I mean, there are certain vintages where you don't have to macerate at all to get color, and then there are certain vintages whereas in the old days when they were trying to extract color, they would leave the skin so long that you'd end up with these extremely tannic wines. these days they don't even talk about maceration. They talk more about infusion. You know, they could care less about the color of wine right now. To the I mean, if you're trying to get color, it's to the detriment of finesse.
Right.
Yeah. I just spotted, sorry, my fault. 17 we're drinking, not 18. So it is a different vintage and gives a different character. I mean, one thing I wanted to touch on briefly was if you look at the label of this bottle, I mean, we could do this a little bit more because people can take a lot from a Burgundy label. And so on the top, you can just see the vineyard named. And then underneath the AOC of the Côte de Nuit village, which is actually a combination of 5 separate villages within the Côte de Nuit that are allowed to label their wine as one Côte de Nuit village. So that's an interesting AOC by itself. And then the vintage and the winemaker. So, you know, it's nice. It's just interesting to get used to starting to read the labels and try and take what you can from them. And if there's any questions about the labels in any of the future tastings, because some of them could be quite complex, don't be afraid to put them into the comments. So on the nose of the wine, what are we getting?
It's a little bit more subdued, you know, a little bit not as bright as that Albert Boillot was.
I get like red plums, red stone fruits for me is the first thing that comes through. They're tart, but they're deep.
Yeah, they're very deep.
I get like macerated cherry, you know, them kind of fresh cherries that come in the jar, not in a jam, in a liquid.
Yeah, like the
American
cherries.
Yeah, and then Kirsch.
Kirsch, someone else said Kirsch.
Yeah.
Which I've never really even heard of before. What is Kirsch?
Kirsch is a liqueur that you use in a Black Forest Gatto. It's like a cherry liqueur.
Ah, I gotcha.
Who said that? Who said that?
Lily said that.
Ah, Lily. That's what she said.
Somebody also said light roasted espresso.
Very good, yeah.
Soft leather.
Yes.
Smoky and peppery.
Yeah, that's interesting. Is that on the nose? Soft leather? I get that too.
I do too. Kind of like that and like the, you know, forest floor, kind of like those, like a little bit wetter notes.
Yeah, and what that is, you know, if we're gonna thinking about evaluating wine, the best way to do it in your brain is to start with what we say primary, secondary, and then tertiary. So 3 separate types of evaluation. Primary comes from the fermentation, which is when we say something like Kirsch or redstone fruits, that's just the fermentation of the fruit. And then primary or secondary would be anything to do with oak or lees, or, you know, any malolactic, any decision that the winemaker makes, the effect of that on the wine. And then the third comes from the aging. So as the tertiary flavors come through, so historically that we would think of leather, tobacco, chocolate, coffee, you know, they can develop within a Pinot Noir.
Right.
So sometimes they do come through as a primary, but more than likely after you allow the wine to develop a little bit more. So it's interesting to get them. I get a little bit of black pepper on the nose.
A little bit. Yeah, a little spiciness.
So the palate, let's go for it.
It's a lot brighter.
Yeah.
Like the fruit comes out a little bit more.
Yeah, it's beautiful on the palate.
It is.
And when we evaluated the 3 wines, especially the 2 reds, initially we weren't sure which way to go, but once we tasted them, before the tasting, we were like, it's obvious this one has to go at this stage.
I think it just has kind of that, it just has a little bit more of everything and a little bit more precision on your tongue too.
I think that 2017 vintage helps it a little bit as well. And it has that extra year, you know. And so I think I agree with what you said, Greg, that the tannins are softer, and but it still has all the wines, as we speak about tonight and all the time, it still has that great acidity, which makes it brilliant with food. And for me, it's one of the standout kind of points of Elden Selection wine is this, I say it every time, is just this, even with wines that have all this other great stuff going on, you still have that undeniable great acidity that refreshes your mouth every time.
Yeah, I never realized how much the acidity really helps, you know, just the flavor and like especially like the finish of the wine. I mean, it lasts a little bit longer. It, you know, hits your mouth in a little bit different way when it has that nice acidity to it.
And your mouth doesn't get as tired, because your taste buds, you don't get as overwhelmed as they would with something that didn't have this great acidity, because otherwise it would become a bit cloggy over time. And that's why, yeah. Right. I think there's black fruits coming through on the palate that weren't there on the nose.
Yeah,
definitely a little bit more black currant coming through, like fresh black currant, like freshly picked.
Yep. Someone said, "Does anyone get hay?"
Yeah, hay is a great descriptor.
I like that smell of hay.
I thought earlier I was getting a little bit of like young sage leaf, but hay is actually probably what I was getting when I said
kind of
that.
like dried herbs-esque thing.
Yeah.
It's a little bit more of a pungent note.
Yeah, very good. So I think as well the finish on this is just hitting the mark, and you can see at 17 it's coming into a really nice drinking window.
Yeah.
And so again, there's a kind of a step up of wines that you could have with this that would really, at a dinner table, if you had this followed by a wine, I think, you know, that you would just see the quality in the winemaker as you progress through up there.
Stephen, that's something that you do very well, is you present a producer's wine in different years and in different appellations, so that you can see how they develop. But I think that what this tasting points out in both of these red wines is that in most years a well-made, even simple Appellation Bourgogne will be charming in it right from the start. I mean, this is I've always, you know, I joke about it, but I always say, I mean, this is the reason that we buy wine by the case, is so that you can taste these wines as they develop. You know, and it's always when you get to the last bottle that it's like it's the best, the best one that you've had. It's sort of the nature of the beast. But it's a shame to miss out on the youthful part of Pinot, because that's there's such an exuberance in the grape variety itself, especially when you can have a year with good acidity and it's got ripe fruit and all that sort of stuff. They just burst. They make, you know, when they talk about something being mouth-watering, I mean, they literally are mouth-watering because the acidity is bringing it out, and your mouth is full of these sort of primary fruit flavors. I mean, they're delicious just right from the beginning. But you can see even now, just going from the 18 to the 17, how they, you know, what a difference a year makes. You know?
Yeah. So listen, we're nearly at our time, I think, but I just wanted to remind you, we're here, myself and Dennis and Ellie and Lily in Burgundy, in Domaine de Cros. We spoke of it at the beginning, and we're going to continue our best, our very difficult task of finding these types of winemakers. It's not that easy, but we'll keep persevering and bringing them to you in the States. We're so lucky there because we have both Joanne and Greg, who are a vital part of what we do. And so through burgundywine.com, we're going to continue to bring you these wines. And
I have one more question, I guess, before, or if anyone else has questions, we can answer too. But what would you serve with the Clos de Magny?
Well, it's interesting because, as I said at the beginning, we talked about different food pairings and the kind of how food pairings are changing. I mean, for me, like you said, Greg, I think that the wine would go with so many different foods, from a simple good pizza, right up to a great beef casserole. It's hard to kind of pick out one. But if I had to say right now for that, what would my taste buds want? I think something like a beef ravioli or something like that. I would probably go
I like
for.
that.
Yeah.
My grandma always used to make veal ravioli. It's delicious.
Yeah.
But you know something, it's different because with us living here in Burgundy, and these are the wines we have. So you know we pair these wines with the food that we're making. It's not like you go out and you make a dish and then you go down to your cellar and you figure out what you're gonna do. Well, you do kind of, but it's not like if you have a cellar full of all sorts of different wines. You just, you know, we you know, we drink Burgundy and all food goes with it.
Yeah, I agree. So this last screen right here, we have 2 cases offer. If you want these 3 and you want 4 bottles of each of them, it's going to be $4.88. And then if you want the elevated one, it's going to be 2 bottles of each of these wines, plus like that next step of a couple different bottles that Stephen was talking about. That one's going to be $7.66. And if you buy those wines within the next 24 hours and use the promo code virtual10, you'll get 10% off your case. And if you need any help or anything else, my number is right here. It's also on our website, burgundywine.com. And then this is my email address. So these offers are up for the next 24 hours, at least with the 10% off. But I will also be calling everybody just for a little bit of feedback tomorrow as well. Last time I called one of our guests, and she gave me the idea of adding these maps. So I'm always looking for different ideas that will make the experience for people a little bit better. So feel free to answer. Again, it's going to be coming from that number. If not, you know, that's okay too. So follow us on all of our social medias, and you know, our next tasting is actually going to be January 17th with a couple of bubbly wines for Valentine's Day. So keep an eye out for that, and that'll be coming to you soon.
Yeah, that sparkling whole area of sparkling wine is becoming very, very exciting, and I think we're going to have some newer ones coming into the stage, which is doubly exciting. So that'll be a good tasting to come to. Yeah. And we've put a lot of work, especially with the year that's in it, 2020, and all the difficulties of this year. We've put a lot of work into trying our best to connect with you guys on social media through our YouTube channel, and improving our Instagram and Facebook, just to try and stay connected with you guys and make you feel connected to us and Domaine de Cromay and still here in France. And certainly looking forward to possibly seeing some of you next year.
I'll see you next year, Stephen.
Well, great to see a lot of familiar names coming down here. Sorry we can't get you all on the screen, but you know, that'll come. It'll come.
And then I'll send you everyone an email too with these 2 offers in it, so you can just click on the link and then purchase whatever you'd like. So
brilliant.
Thanks for joining us today. Cheers, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your bottles.
Take care.